What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so I want to give a shout out to Mahari Nation. Mahari did a brilliant video earlier today debunking this talking point that Detroit Pistons bad boy fans have regarding the Pistons having won their titles during a time when the other superpowers or the other great marquee teams were at their peak, which isn't true. You know, it's not true at all. I just want to add on my thoughts to that and back up what Mahari was saying. But go subscribe to Mahari's channel. It's Mahari's Nation podcast. Really good channel. And he's truly a historian of the NBA. These are my thoughts. I've heard Isaiah Thomas. I've heard some and read some Piston loyalists and some bad boy fans say this over the years, and it's not true at all. Number one, let's start with the Lakers. Now, it's true the Lakers were on a roll during the playoffs in 1989. Okay? And it can be said that were it not for injuries to Byron Scott and Magic Johnson, that not only could that series have been competitive, the 1989 NBA Finals, not only could it have been competitive, the Lakers, in my opinion, probably would have won that series, just based upon the fact that even though they swept the Lakers, those games were not really blowouts. They were kind of close. I know at least two of those games were pretty close. But despite that, that Lakers team was aging. Okay, they were not the same Showtime Lakers of old. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was 42 years old in his last season and was a complete shell of himself, averaging only 10 points a game and shooting only 47% from the floor. This is a guy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who at that time was shooting 56% for his career, over 56% for his career. And in his prime, had a career field goal percentage of 57%. That year, he shot 47% from the floor in limited attempts. He just wasn't the same offensive guy anymore. He was done. He was done as a professional basketball player. Michael Thompson, I think, was in his last year or near the end of his career. Michael Cooper was in his last season. Got to remember, back then, people didn't. These guys were coming out of college. All right, these guys would often play 3 or 4 years of college ball, so they didn't get a head start in the NBA like these guys do today, coming in at 19, 20. A lot of these guys come in at 22, 23, 24 years of age. All right, a lot of those guys from the Lakers were getting up there. That's why in the next couple of years, you would see these new faces with the Lakers. You would see the Sam Perkins and the Vlade Divacs and the Sedale Threats. You know, you would see these new faces because the older ones were retiring, you know, for the Lakers. The Boston Celtics, you could say, it was even more precarious. You know, some people have questioned Red Auerbach for being too loyal to the Big Three in Boston. Okay? Start with Larry Bird. Larry Bird wasn't that old. He was only 32 years old in 1988-89. The year before that, he had arguably his best statistical season. But during the end of the season, into the playoffs, something was noticeably wrong with Larry Bird. He wasn't moving very well out there on the court. And ultimately, he was diagnosed after averaging only 10 points per game in a terrible series against the Detroit Pistons, where he only averaged 10 points a game, which is very unbird-like. He was diagnosed with bone spurs. Had to have surgery to remove the bone spurs. Only played 6 games during the 88-89 season. And afterwards, Larry Bird was never the same player again. The last 3 years of his career, Larry Bird, although he would have moments, he was never the same player again. He could not move the same way. His back got worse and worse to the point where he had to have his spine manually manipulated by a specialist before every game just so he could be able to be out there and play. The last couple of years of Larry Bird's career were torture, literally. After he announced his retirement from professional basketball, after the Dream Team experience, and before the start of the 1992-93 season, it was in August. I think it was August 19th, 1992. Larry Bird went to the woods, took his back brace that he had been a prisoner of for at least 2 years, got a shotgun, got a shotgun, and blew it to smithereens. So Larry Bird was not the same player. Robert Parrish was a Methuselah. Don't get me wrong. Robert Parrish played until he was 43 years old. But Robert Parrish was no longer in the best years of his career by 88-89. He was 35 years old at that time. Now, he did average, I think, something like 17, 18 points a game, maybe 9 rebounds a game. He was very productive for a very long time. He was almost like, in some ways, I guess you could compare him to the Pete Rose of the NBA. He stayed very productive for a very long time. But he was not the same Chief from 1983, 84. Okay, he wasn't the same player. Kevin McHale definitely wasn't the same player by that year. After he broke his foot during the 1987 season, he was never the same player. Dennis Johnson was a shell of himself by the 89-90 season. He was not the same player. Okay, so the Celtics team as a whole were not the same Celtics that they were just 2-3 years prior. And lo and behold, the Sixers, my goodness, the Sixers, who were a power to be reckoned with in the early to mid 1980s. Moses Malone by this time was playing with, where was he at in 88, 89? Was he with the Washington Bullets, maybe? I think he was with the Bullets, putting up 20 and 10, but he wasn't the Moses that he was with the Rockets and the Sixers, when he was averaging 25 and 13 or 14, or when he was with Houston averaging 30 points and 17 rebounds a game. He wasn't the same guy. Julius Erving was retired. Bobby Jones was retired. Andrew Toney, I believe, had just retired prematurely and sadly because of foot injuries. Mark Ivoroni, well, he wasn't a great player, but I think he was retired or near the end of his career. It was just Charles Barkley and a bunch of bums in Philly. And the Bulls, and I'm glad Mahari brought this up. He did an excellent job speaking upon that particular season. Now, the Bulls did make a huge jump during the 87-88 season, winning 50 ball games that year. Michael Jordan averaged 35 points a game, won Defensive Player of the Year, leading the NBA steals at 3.2 swipes per game. Shot 5% from the floor that year. But the Bulls took a step backwards in 1988-89. They won 47 ball games. And this was the year after they traded away Charles Oakley, their interior presence and enforcer and rebounder. Bulls management in particular, in particular Jerry Krause, felt that Horace Grant could and would eventually fill that role that Oakley was serving. But because of some roster deficiencies, they decided to move Mike to the point guard position. And Mike had a season that LeBron James would envy. He averaged 32.6 points per game, 32.5 points per game, 8 rebounds and 8 assists. I think he averaged 2.8 steals or something like that, too. So the thing about it, the Bulls had an okay season, but it took a step backwards. And the team that really stepped up, and the team that most people were talking about at that time, most of the prognosticators were predicting that it was going to be the Cavaliers that was going to be the team of the 90s and not the Bulls. Cleveland had won 57 games that year. And you've heard, if you've been watching The Last Dance, Michael Jordan mentioned this in the Last Dance. I've mentioned this for years. That year, Cleveland swept the Bulls during the regular season 6-0. The last game that they played against each other, Cleveland rested their starters while the Bulls played theirs, and the Bulls still lost that game. So that's why all of the sports writers saw the Bulls losing that series in the first round against Cleveland. It didn't happen. It went 5 games. Michael hit that ridiculous fucking shot at the buzzer to beat Cleveland, and that started the Bulls' ascendancy. They beat the Knicks in the semis. Ultimately, they lost to the Detroit Pistons, but the fact that they went 6 games with the Pistons was a phenomenal feat in itself. Being that, as young a team as they were, they went 6 games with the eventual NBA champions. Now, a lot of people like to bring up the fact that it was amazing that LeBron took that team to the finals in 2007. What an amazing accomplishment. And it was. It was. I watched it. I was amazed at what LeBron James did that year. But let's not shortchange Jordan right here, though. Pippen and Grant were not Pippen and Grant yet. Okay, they weren't themselves yet. So, in a lot of ways, during the 88-89 season, Michael really didn't have a lot of help that year. Consistently. The fact that that team wasn't even expected to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, but beat the New York Knicks in the semis, and then held a 2-1 lead against the eventual NBA champions, only to lose in 6. That's pretty fucking impressive. And then the next year, in the conference finals, they took the Pistons, who were the defending champions. They took the Pistons to 7 games. Now, they got blown out 93-74 in Game 7. But let's remember something. Jordan had a fine game. I think he had 31 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists, maybe 2 steals. But if he had a little fucking help, the Bulls would have won. The rest of the starters, okay, all 4 starters, other than Jordan, as well as 6-man B.J. Armstrong, combined to shoot 11 for 57 from the fucking floor. That's something like 18% shooting. Pippen went 1 for 10. B.J. Armstrong went 1 for 8. Horace Grant 3 for 17. So if the rest of the starters could have managed to have hit out of the 4 of them plus BJ, if they had managed to hit 5 extra field goals, well, not 5, 10 extra field goals between 5 of them, they could have won the fucking game. Now, let me say this too about the Pistons before I go. Isaiah Thomas is, in my opinion, the 3rd greatest point guard of all time behind Magic and Oscar. But let's be honest about something too. People love to say Michael didn't do shit without Pippen. Or people like to shit on Kobe back in the day. They would say Kobe ain't do anything unless he had Mike or a big man. Shaq or a big man, whatever, right? People, you know how people are, man. They love to, if they don't like somebody, they like to bring them down, whatever. Or even people that don't like LeBron, they'll say LeBron ain't went without a super team. Okay, whatever. Isaiah Thomas never won shit. Until Dennis Rodman and John Sally and Rick Mahorn, those guys got there. Okay? That 86-87 season turned everything around for Detroit. That's the year that they drafted John Sally. That's the year that they drafted Dennis Rodman. And during the offseason is when they acquired Adrian Dantley. Okay? Over the next 2 seasons, 86-87, 87-88, Adrian Dantley would be their leading scorer during the regular season. Adrian Dantley was the player that pushed the Detroit Pistons from being mediocrities to being a team to be reckoned with and a championship contender. I think Adrian Dantley gets a shortchanged throughout history. Adrian Dantley was on some poor teams with Utah. Okay, when he was leading the NBA scoring. But Adrian Dantley was the guy that pushed that team to a championship level team. And had it not been for a phantom call against Bill Laimbeer, Adrian Dantley would have won a championship in 88. But the problem with Adrian Dantley was a star in his own right. Adrian Dantley was a star in the NBA before Isaiah Thomas was. Okay? Adrian Dantley had been on multiple teams. Now, it's true that AD Ball don't work on all teams. Adrian Dantley played with the Lakers in the late 70s. AD Ball don't really work well with a guy like Kareem. You know what I'm saying? Kareem works best when he has an offense running through him, and generally he works best when he has a capable, really great point guard with him, with the team. So that's why AD didn't work out in LA. All right. But Adrian Dantley was a great player, and he didn't kiss ass, okay? He was a star in his own right. And Isaiah Thomas resented that. And Isaiah Thomas was behind Adrian Dantley being traded to the Mavericks in exchange for his good buddy, Mark Aguirre. That's all good. But, like Adrian Dantley said, don't be a snake about it. So my thing is this, you know what I'm saying? Isaiah Thomas might be solid in some areas. But I just think Isaiah Thomas is resentful because he's not seen in the same light as some other players. He doesn't like that shit. You know. But that's all I got to say, man. Tell me what you guys think.